Welcome to the second in REBA's series of podcasts exploring reward and benefits perspectives on the coronavirus crisis. I'm Maggie Williams, Content Director of REBA, and I'm here today with Debi O'Donovan, Director of REBA, Dawn Lewis, REBA's Content Editor, and Dr Duncan Brown, experienced independent reward researcher and consultant. Today we're talking about the short-term effects of the coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic on reward and benefits, and also how it could reshape strategy and practice in the future. REBA has just released the findings from its second SNAP survey exploring practitioners' responses to the crisis to date. This featured insight from 213 companies representing over 1.3 million employees. It explored reward and benefit professionals' responses to the recently announced coronavirus job retention scheme, how they are dealing with the global nature of the crisis, and also its effect on benefits provision, spend and future plans. Debi, you've been looking into the results in detail. What are some of the standout findings for you?
There were three key areas that stood out for me. One was looking at those employers with global workforces and how they are dealing with challenges, how employers are supporting employee financial well-being, and then finally I'm going to talk about the change in spend, how people are spending differently on reward and employee benefits. So looking at global workforces first, almost 2/3 of our respondents have a global workforce. And just going very top level, we've got far more detail in the survey, which, as Maggie would have said, you can download from reba.global/reports. What we find among global employers is that they really are trying to grapple with different governments having different advice and different legislative changes and what that means for employees across different countries and how hard that is to get up to speed with those. They're also trying to deal with expatriates, either keeping them in their host country or getting them home, as well as trying to maintain business and supply chains across borders. Clearly, there's a huge issue here among global challenges, and we will be looking at these in more depth in the coming weeks during a REBA webinar. In terms of financial well-being, and perhaps this is a little bit more UK-based for employers, I think people may have seen the survey that came out from the Institute of Fiscal Studies on Monday, the 3rd of April, showing that low earners, women and younger workers will be hardest hit in terms of earnings. We are seeing that a lot of our respondents are trying to support financial well-being among their workforces at this time. The main type of support, 60% of our respondents are promoting financial education at the moment, and a third are promoting financial advice. More tactical things that we're seeing, 40% are or plan to refund season ticket loans, 20% are helping staff to spot scams, but there's a whole lot. So again, have a look at the survey and all the other amazing work that employers are doing. In terms of spend, most of the benefit spend has been on health and well-being benefits and insurances. The biggest shift we see is among employee assistance programs, and about 1 in 4 employers who currently offer an EAP have increased spending on that EAP, either to improve the quality of the service or extend it to more of their workforce. From what I have spoken to members, I know that's quite often extending EAPs into other countries as well. Another shift that we're seeing is more spend on virtual GPs. About 1 in 8 employers have increased their spend on their existing virtual GP service, while we see about 8% of our respondents have put in a virtual GP service for the very first time. In terms of cutting back on spend, reducing spend, we're not seeing this coming through so much on the employee benefit side, but rather when it comes to pay and bonuses. And broadly, we're seeing that about 40% of employers are planning to spend less on pay across both executive pay and all employee pay, and about half are planning to spend less on executive bonuses or all employee bonuses. Clearly, a lot is under review at the moment. Pay reviews and bonuses are paid at different times of the years and happen at different times of the year. So we expect that figure to shift over the coming weeks and months. So we will keep our finger on the pulse and let you know how that's shifting.
Thanks, Debi, and I'm confident that Duncan will want to talk about executive pay in more detail later in the podcast. So, as I mentioned, this is our second survey. The first was released in mid-March, and while that was only a few short weeks ago, it gauged responses before the announcement of the coronavirus job retention scheme. So, Dawn, our current survey shows that 63% of REBA members expect to use the coronavirus job retention scheme for some or all of their staff. What impact do you think it has had on business and in reward in the short term?
The impact of the government scheme means that employers have had to really shift their thinking around what they're doing with staff really quickly. So when we did our first snapshot survey in the middle of March, it was just before the government announced the job retention scheme, and that showed that employers were having to really think on their feet to work out how they're going to be able to sustain their businesses. So at that time, nearly half employers were looking to reduce pay rises or defer them. A third of them were looking to cancel pay rises. Another quarter were looking to reduce hours, and 12.5% were making redundancies at that point. Since this furlough scheme has come into place, and we're now we've done our second survey, that picture has changed a little bit. So now we're only seeing that 32% of employers have decided to postpone pay reviews and pay rises and promotions and that sort of thing. So that is down a little bit on the 44% that we saw first time round, and just 7% have actually cancelled pay rises and promotions altogether. So I think these figures are starting to demonstrate that the scheme is hopefully working as intended, and it is saving jobs, at least for the immediate future. Looking ahead, our survey showed that 36% of employers expect to regain their market position in the medium term. But that does show that there is optimism out there that businesses can perhaps come back from this and recover.
Thanks, Dawn. Duncan, with that hopeful view in mind, do you think we can simply go back to business as usual in reward once the current crisis has passed?
I think both at the organisation and the state level, this has been such a shock and such a change that it is going to be different. There's no doubt there's going to have to be differences. You know, we're somehow going to have to fund the furlough scheme, and I guess the question is, are those changes going to go in a positive or a negative direction? Things like, it's just shifted, I don't know about you, it's just shifted our whole perceptions of certain issues. So, you know, I've been campaigning for years on pay and progression for low skill workers, and suddenly they're not called low skill workers anymore, they're called key workers. You know, and we're banging our dustbin lids on a Thursday evening to celebrate, you know, not just the nurses and the incredible medics in the NHS, but, you know, we should be banging our dustbin lids for the workers in care homes looking after our elderly parents who you know have got no safety equipment and are putting their lives at risk every day and are paid the minimum wage and on insecure contracts. And so I think employers need to be thinking about, you know, can we go back to that? Do we really want that for these workers going forward? And I think our employers need to be asking, you know, are we going to go back to the status quo, and particularly in terms of the fairness and security of their package?
So I was reading your recent article on REBA's website. You talk about the crisis driving a shift towards responsible employers and responsible reward. Does that mean we had irresponsible reward before?
That's possibly an implication. I would say, rather than deliberately irresponsible, I would say possibly excessively market and cost-driven reward and benefits policies, which maybe didn't pay enough attention to security and fairness. And the government's good work agenda, I think, was already encouraging / requiring companies to up that in their agendas. And I think this crisis is pushing that ever more fairly. You know, it's Schroders and the International Monetary Fund and the European Bank of Central Reconstruction Development that are saying to companies, if you're going to accept these bailouts, we want to see action taken on executive pay, for example. And similarly at the bottom end, the key workers now, the low-skill key workers, I would hope that all employers who employ those sorts of workers, you know, great that the retailers are paying some additional bonuses to their shop staff who are working incredibly hard. But doesn't that say, why were we paying them so low beforehand?
And what do you think will be some of the other wider changes that we'll see over the longer term?
I think it raises a whole issue of pay structuring and enfranchising all jobs really with pay structures and pay progression within those structures. Across large parts of the public sector, we essentially saw pay progression removed. I think the need to progress workers and offer them pay and career progression opportunities, I think the pressure for that, which has already been building, will become really inescapable. I think in the private sector, it'll give a big push for profit sharing and employee share ownership and employee share schemes. Only about 10 to 15% of employees are enfranchised in that way with a share in the success of their business, when the vast majority of executives, for example, have differentiated incentives. Why is that? Why have we done that? Why shouldn't all staff share in success? So I think these questions, which we're getting asked anyway, are going to become a lot more pointed, and companies need to act, because if they don't, I think we're going to see more legislative intervention.
Many thanks, Duncan. There's definitely plenty for both businesses and governments to consider in the coming weeks and months. At REBA, we'll continue to track these developments and support the reward and benefits community in our weekly webinars and podcasts, surveys, content, and in our REBA Link peer-to-peer network. Please visit www.reba.global for more information or see the links in the text below. Thanks for listening today.